everybody. We got a great one today, for a change. Well, actually, not really, because we have Molly Jong-Fast and Mark Leibovich, who are always great together. I caught up with them the day after the Democratic Convention. They were both traveling, but Peter managed to capture them both for this conversation. You may remember I had spoken with them not long ago after the Republican National Convention, where the Republicans were cocky as hell, coming right after the assassination attempt, and of course, with Biden still in the race. And we were depressed as hell because Biden was still in the race. But of course, the Trump team was kind of fooled by not anticipating what Mark calls an 80% chance of rain, that Biden would most likely drop out and everything would instantly change. The Trump team had everything in the Biden basket and got caught flat-footed, because if you watched the Democratic Convention in Chicago this past week, quite a contrast to the Republican Convention in Milwaukee, where former President Trump confidently improvised a 90-some-minute monologue that passed as an acceptance speech. We had our former and current presidents speak: Clinton, Obama, Biden. Former President Carter couldn't make it, but he had a good excuse. And Hillary gave a brilliant speech about all the cracks in the glass ceiling that Vice President Kamala Harris will smash on November 5th if we all do our jobs. As Vice President Harris implored us,
fellow Americans, this election is not only the most important of our lives, it is one of the most important in the life of our nation.
Yikes. Oh, boy. Not one of those again. The last one was pretty damn important, too. I feel like if we can just beat Trump one more time, we just might be through with him, and our democracy will survive. Well, let's get right to Molly and Mark, and a great one, as usual. You were both in Chicago for the whole thing, right?
Yep. Yes. But I think we both had very different experiences there. You were doing a lot of the more writerly stuff, and I was actually doing a lot of podcasting and video. And so and I mostly was doing interviews. And I think you were doing just a sort of different thing. So I think it's probably pretty interesting, the differences too, if that makes any sense.
Well, Mark, you're a journalist, and Molly, you're the host of your podcast and a writer also for Vanity Fair. Yeah. And Mark, you're for the Atlantic, and it's not even the Atlantic Monthly anymore. It's the Atlantic, because it's constantly changing.
Nope. No, it happens all the time.
And you had an article in there on Tuesday, which I missed. But so what did you write about?
You got to read the article, Al. No, it was an article. This is the problem with writing during conventions. I mean, it was a story about the mood of the convention as of, say, Tuesday morning, and it's really no longer operational because
you wrote off Monday, right?
Well, yeah, Monday was kind of a messy day, and in some ways, in that, yes, there's a lot of momentum in the Democratic Party, and that was displayed in many ways. But, the Biden situation remains kind of awkward, a little messy. There was a lot of speculation about, how's his relationship with the Pelosi's, with the Obamas, even with Kamala, and that kind of whole thing. And then, Biden gives a speech. It starts and ends very late, and then he kind of skips town. He hightails it.
And what you write about is by the time you get it up, a day old.
Yeah, it was actually fresh for a few hours.
Yeah, it was I wrote a similar thing, and I had a similar experience. I wrote the pre-mood, and by Tuesday, no one cares because
it's over.
Yeah, and then the speaker, the Obamas on Tuesday night kind of, didn't reset them.
Those were good speeches, the Obamas.
Those were amazing. The thing with the Obamas that I think is interesting is they're so singularly, they're different. They give different kinds of speeches, but they're so good. It's almost like they're so gifted that it almost makes everyone else seem bad.
Well, the Democratic Convention made everyone in Milwaukee seem bad. How was contrast your experiences in Milwaukee? Now, to be fair, that's a Republican convention, and you guys, I suspect, I don't know officially, but I suspect you're progressives.
Well, I don't think Mark has registered anything, right?
Yeah, Al, I have common cause with many conservatives. I'm progressive on some issues. I'm pretty independent, actually.
I don't go there because they scream at me. But what I think is interesting about that Republican convention, and I didn't go, but I did go to many CPACs, so I feel like I've done it. They really did do a whole convention against Joe Biden, and then Joe Biden immediately dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
But they were so cocky.
Yeah.
So cocky.
That was your experience, wasn't it, Mark?
Yeah, and with good reason. I mean, the polls were great, and the Democrats were truly it was a really messy time because Biden hadn't gotten out yet, and not only was Biden a weak candidate, he hadn't gotten out yet, and there was a camp saying, he's earned this and blah blah blah. And we were all there.
Yeah,
but,
I was basically saying after the debate that he shouldn't be there. Yeah, and I took a lot of heat for that.
Yeah, you were right. A lot of us.
It's interesting because they probably also anticipate it's possible that he'll get out, and if he does, it won't change that much.
They were caught so flat-footed, and it speaks to how ill-prepared they were. And I think really is a tremendous error on the part of his campaign, or just their complete it's not even lack of imagination. It's like, hey, there's this 80% chance of rain. Let's
right.
bring an umbrella, right? Like, oh no, what could possibly go wrong? Let's just proceed like there won't be an 80% chance of rain.
But they still haven't figured out how to do it. They keep wanting to define her, so he's going to define her as not being black. I mean, he can't get a message that sticks.
Yeah. But that's him. That's not his campaign, right? I mean,
it's all of it. I think they're just not prepared. It's sort of, they just can't get their footing is what it seems like to me.
Well, let's talk about Kamala, because how did you view her speech? I thought it was a pretty masterful speech.
I've always thought she was good. And at some point, I decided that the world was just so sexist and so racist that she was never going to get a shot. But I have always really thought she was good. And I've interviewed her. I interviewed her in 2022 and 2023. And I've always thought she's really smart. She's one of those people whose whole life has been about running for office. So she's almost always made these kind of decisions where she's sort of been very careful. And she's sort of this new generation of politician. I've always felt that she has been very much underestimated. I mean, the fact that she's done these kind of gonzo fundraising numbers, $500 million, she's got this army of volunteers. She has this virality on TikTok, which is, things that are sort of inexplicable, or not inexplicable because I think
not
they
anticipated.
Are explicable. Right, but not anticipated by the hive mind, makes me feel that she was always the perfect person for this, and she was deeply underestimated. And I've always felt like she was much, much, much more talented than anyone gave her credit for. So for me, I'm pretty thrilled for her. And and as a woman, I feel very when you see Hillary, and you really see that you had to have Hillary before you could have her. She did actually change the calculus of what we look for when we look at politics.
And Hillary gave a hell of a speech.
I thought she was great. Yeah. No, I mean, I guess I would say on Kamala, I would plead guilty of being someone who underestimated her.
Me too. And I served with her, and I didn't see this.
Yeah. I mean, I was going by her presidential campaign in 2020, which wasn't great. And then her vice presidency, which is, it's a pretty thankless job. And I think it was made pretty thankless for a lot of reasons. I mean, given the border, things like that.
She wasn't given the border. She was given Central America, the 3 countries in Central America.
But one of the things that's interesting about her, 2 things that I think about a lot is when she was given Central America, the president of Mexico, Obrador, I always get it wrong. I always mispronounce it. Mm-hmm. He really didn't like Biden and really did adore her. And so in certain ways, there were these little stories that unless you were really paying attention to her, you might not have gotten. But, when I interviewed her, I talked to her staff about that. I mean, she did a couple of really good things. She did 2 Munich security conferences where she was a superstar. Unfortunately, the third one, she was like, don't worry about Trump. And the Europeans got really mad at her. But, because the Europeans are very serious and worried.
Worried about Trump because he'll withdraw from NATO.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
But, and
that's
so
like
she
a big
took
deal,
flack. Yeah.
That is a big deal.
No, I know. But she did not. Yeah. They sort of took it out on her a little bit. But I have seen her do some pretty masterful stuff as vice president. But again, vice president is totally, whatever job.
Yeah, I mean, but having said that, I mean, there's nothing like the president. And I think she's just had such a glorious, 5 weeks or so. And I think that basically continued through the convention. I mean, the question is this the end of the beginning, or is this just going to keep propelling her forward through November? Having said that, I was not as blown away by the speech as some people apparently were. I mean, there were people who immediately said home run. I thought in the moment it seemed more like a double.
Well, compare it to Trump's speech.
Right. Well,
it was Babe Ruth and Aaron Judge and Barry. I mean, it was. That's the thing. I mean, if you were going to grade it on that curve, I mean,
how odd was that? How odd was an hour and a half?
He's always like that. What's odd is that we keep thinking he's not going to always be like that. But he's always like, the thing was he had a moment there where he could have not been a complete, but he always is. But the thing I would say about her, which I thought was interesting about that speech, that was a speech about her running against him, right? That was a speech, sure. And it wasn't like a normal speech. It wasn't like, I'm so great. It was literally like, this is what we're going to do that's not him. And I actually thought that was pretty smart. I mean, again.
Well, she also had to introduce herself. I mean, people don't know her. So she started with her, who her parents were and what it was like growing up. And I mean, we got a lot of biography there at the beginning.
Also a short speech, too.
Exactly. Yeah, she managed to keep it less than an hour and a half.
Well, she actually stuck to the, she could read it off a prompter if she needed to, but she really had digested that speech.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
I mean, also the shorter those speeches are, the better everyone thinks they are. Like nobody is good for an hour and a half.
But some people are good for 45 minutes or something. Like how long were the Obamas? Well, they weren't that long.
Well, you can't. They're not. It's not.
They're
what
not
they
the
have.
Primary.
It's not normal. Yeah. They're so good. But there were a lot of people who spoke, and you tell me if you think this is wrong, but where we did not need to hear them. Like Kathy Hochul. Who is that for?
That jumped out at me when I heard that. Right? I went, why? But,
she's running 20 points behind the partisan lean. 15 points behind the vote. She dragged down the whole ticket. She's the reason that Democrats lost the House. And we're going to highlight her screaming at us.
I had some of the very, very same thoughts. But they do have to fill up the night, I guess.
No, they don't.
You're right. And they ran late, didn't they?
And they bounced James Taylor. They bounced. If you had a choice between James Taylor and Kathy Hochul, who would you rather hear?
Well, they bounced Taylor Swift and Beyonce last night in favor of Leon Panetta.
Leon Panetta, why did they have Leon Panetta? Can you make that make sense?
He added heft. I mean, there was real seriousness there. His speech was good.
Right. But he's not Beyonce.
Speak for yourself.
So what is going on with Trump? I mean, he's completely unfocused. He steps in it right and left, dissing our troops.
He really doesn't like people who've been injured serving the country.
Yes.
Which I think is an odd choice for a president. But
odd choice. Although I do think that while his tweeting or whatever he was doing, what's the word, truthing, during Kamala Harris's speech last night was in the middle of the speech said, where's Hunter?
I think it was malfunctioning.
Can we talk just about your experiences there? What is it like day to day? What are you doing day to day when you're there before and after the session?
I would say that day to day, nothing really there are day sessions, but the key is, and they're delegation breakfasts. Al, you've lived through this. If you're a politician, you usually just
go to the delegation breakfast.
You go to a bunch of them, yeah.
Okay.
And you speak at it. Yeah.
You speak at them.
And then you also go to breakfast with donors.
Yeah,
and stuff.
exactly. And by the way, I think I first kind of met you at the Democratic Convention in 2016 when I was writing about you, and you were going to a bunch of delegation breakfasts. So there's that during the day, but things don't really start until the evening, which is maybe 5 o'clock when people start showing up, and there are some early speeches. The delegates file in.
Let me, Project 2025 came up, and your series on them and your podcast are just exemplary.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, they really are.
I mean, the whole idea was, remember, this comes from Reagan, right? Reagan had done this. He'd written up a policy proposal, published it, and it had become, sort of this thing. And I think they really thought that they were going...
Project
that this
1981.
Right.
And he won.
and he won. And I think they thought they were being so smart, but actually the problem also is when you go through it, it has so many different organizations that are involved in the writing of it. And of course, Trump's name is mentioned more than 300 times.
What are some of the highlights of it in terms of like putting the Justice Department under the president?
Yeah, the larger thing is this idea that basically the executive branch controls most of the federal government. So the DOJ.
You fire how many civil servants? 50,000 or something?
Well, you fire a huge quantity of civil servants, which is like, that is, I think, probably the most problematic part of it, because they just don't have the numbers but they want to replace everyone with loyalists. The other thing is, I know why they want to do this, but like the Department of Education, they want to dissolve the Department of Education, which is like largely responsible for like Pell Grants and also like juicing up education in red states where there are lower state taxes. Like a lot of this stuff will actually ultimately really hurt people who live in red states with low state taxes.
And on things like they'll raise prescription drug prices.
Anything that the federal government does, they would like it not to do.
Homeland Security.
Right. But then they have this thing. This was actually interesting yesterday. So Harris talked in her speech about this sort of abortion master general, which then got fact checked because, it's not technically an abortion master general, but it kind of is, which is someone. So they're going to change the Department of Health and Human Services to like the Department of Life and something sort of very Orwellian, life and living. And then they're going to have someone who's sort of has a federal abortion purview, who will, I don't know if they're going to exactly monitor women's periods, but it sounds very, it does not sound.
I think they are.
All of this is about this supposition that life begins at a fertilized egg.
So that is life begins at conception, because with IVF, there are these eggs that are fertilized, and that's right. They're all technically live according to them.
So wait, can I ask you a question, Molly? Is there actually a term, someone like an abortion master general? Like, is that actually a thing?
No. I mean, that she had said there was going to be like an abortion, something to the extent of, but I made that up.
You made it up, yes. But she didn't.
She said something to that effect.
Okay. But I think we can all agree that it would hypothetically be an interesting job title.
Yes. Orwellian, but disturbing, but yes.
Yes, I'm kidding.
I think, yes. And also possible in this weird. I mean, they're so obsessed with abortion, and it's such a loser for them. I mean, and you saw even today, Trump truthed about how he's going to.
Yes.
Yeah, talk about that. That's so interesting.
He's a hero of reproductive rights. What did he say?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to protect women's reproductive rights.
How is he not facing unbelievable backlash among the pro-lifers on the right, which is as hardcore a constituency on the right as there has been over the last however many years, right? I mean, yes, Pence has spoken out about it and some others have, but how is this not just like a 10-alarm fire for Republicans? I mean, maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately that will backlash against him. And also the other thing is nobody believes that.
Well, does anyone believe anything he says, including him?
Which would think to be you'd think would be a problem for someone running for president. It only makes him stronger. Oh my God.
He was speaking of which, they're going to be when's the first debate? September 10th?
10th?
Weeks, right?
September 10th, I think.
Yeah.
So that's the next stop in this campaign, really.
This is the fundamental post-truth problem of Donald Trump, is that, I mean, even his supporters don't believe him.
That's a problem, one would think.
But it isn't.
But
It isn't for him, evidently.
What would you say? And you guys have different perspectives because you watched all this, and Molly, you watched some of it. You were in the hall for some of it. Top 3 speeches, if you had to name them.
You know who was really good? And this it was a shorter speech, as it should have been. Steve Kerr.
Oh, terrific.
Wasn't that a great speech?
Yeah, I love Steve Kerr's speech.
And I thought Walz's speech was great.
Walz is really good.
I thought Walz's speech was the best.
Yeah, Walz, Obama's,
Hillary.
I'm trying to think.
Hillary.
When we talked earlier, Mark, you mentioned the moment where they started yelling, "Lock him up."
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, this was one of my top 3 favorite moments of the whole convention. So Hillary, when she was speaking, she mentioned Trump's legal issues, criminal issues, and a lock him up chant went up from the crowd. And you could see her initial instinct is to be responsible, which is that, no, we don't do this. This
Right.
is not our thing. It was very wrong 8 years ago, and it's very wrong now. And after about 2 or 3 seconds, you could just see this thing come over her face where she just decided to go with it. And she nodded and she smiled. And it was like, yeah, you know what? Okay. And it felt like a Rubicon of some kind was passed, not just for Hillary, but for the whole party. And I think, then you had the next night where the Obamas, especially Michelle with the when they go low, we go high thing, which she basically disavowed. And with both speeches, I mean, those are tough but also joyful and resonant, historic speeches that I thought, just really nailed it. What were so we think Walz, Obama's, Al, you said Hillary. What would you say, Molly, would your third be?
I mean,
what would your 3 be?
I love Walz. I mean, I've interviewed Walz a bunch of times.
Yeah. Well, Al knows him, right?
Yeah, I'm from Minnesota. And when he first ran in 2006, I was a big supporter of his and campaigned with him all over southern Minnesota. And I kept telling Rahm Emanuel, who was head of the DCCC, this guy is great. And he said he can't win in the first district. And it's a rural district. No one had ever won since like sometime in the 19th century. No Democrat.
Didn't Rahm say this guy's got no money?
Well, he had no money. And so I was asking Rahm to give him money.
and
what did
Rahm said, no, he can't win. He can't win. And then finally, at a certain point, I got a call from one of Rahm's people who said, we're going to put $50,000 in the Mankato. And I said, it's Mankato. and he said, well, okay, we're going to put $50,000 in the Mankato. I went, thanks. So you can call it Mankato, put as much money as you can put in it. And he started winning, and he won.
Wow!
And that was 2006 when the Congress went, when the House went for the Democrats. So he was part of that wave. So what else did you want to talk about, Mark?
No, I look, it was an incredibly rich week. I mean, Rich, there was so much material. I think we're all digesting it. It was a bit of a blur if you were there, as I'm sure Molly would attest, and as you would attest, who's been to a million of these things. But I just thought that, wow, I mean, it was a great kind of display of the talent in the party. I think it was kind of near perfect convention. I guess I would say near because I thought the timing was kind of an unforced error, just all the speeches going late and so forth. And I think the Biden situation was kind of awkward, but that was kind of put to bed early in the week. But I also think ultimately people will remember this convention by what happens in November. I mean, the end of this story has not ended yet. The ending of this story will be the whole story. And I think that will sort of retroactively define whether this was the ultimate fool's gold. Or
there's also just events worldwide and what's going to happen, and with Gaza and with Iran, and one of the things that I think the Democrats did in this convention was talk about Ukraine, and I think that is I think there are certain issues that I think that we are underwater on, which is the border and a couple of other things. But I think on Ukraine, I think we win on that. I think the American people support that war.
They do poll. I mean, as polls go, sure. I mean, although it's kind of it's not like a top 5 issue by any stretch. I mean, certainly immigration is. No, and by the way, I thought in Kamala Harris's speech on Thursday, I mean, the border stuff they handled pretty masterfully. I mean, they focused on the bill and Trump's refusal to sign it, and you always bring the bipartisanship of it, and like, we want to do this, put it back. I mean, they have no answer for that.
And by the way, I interviewed Murphy again to talk to him about that. And that's such an interesting thing because,
That's Chris Murphy of
Connecticut.
Who was really the lead Democrat on the bill.
Yeah, it was him, Sinema, and Lankford. And he said, and, he spent Thanksgiving and Christmas negotiating that bill. And he said, we had Mitch's people in there. We knew that it wouldn't get done without Mitch. But the problem was Mitch couldn't deliver the senators once Trump said that. He told me that he texted Sinema that night and was like, the bill's going to be dead by morning. And it was.
But that was a nifty way to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, he did it. They really did it because they thought it would work. They didn't do it as a stunt.
Hey, guys, I'm just seeing on Twitter, I hate to be one of these people, but RFK is in fact endorsing Trump.
And what is he getting in exchange?
We don't know. What do we think of this?
Well, I think this is a huge blow to one of the campaigns, and I can't figure out which one.
I think this is potentially hurtful to the Democrats. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what kind of people out there exist who were voting for RFK and say, okay, I love him so much, I'm going to follow his lead, now support a guy that I never liked at all before. Did that really work that way?
I think there weren't a ton of Democrats who were voting for him at this point.
Wasn't it like young people who couldn't bear the idea of voting for an 82-year-old?
And now they don't want to vote for a woman, I guess.
Biden.
I mean, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense.
I agree with you.
I think that mostly RFK had been sort of hemorrhaging in the polls because people had figured out that he's not his dad. Mm-hmm. But I do think, I think because originally people were like RFK, and remember that ad he ran where it was like meant to evoke the 60s. So I don't think he picks up a lot of Democrats, but in an election that's very close, it may be enough.
So basically, the next big event is the debate.
Yeah,
on September 10th, but we don't know that.
Yeah.
Because the way this season has gone, this political season has gone, there's a huge event if there's a development in the war, if Iran enters the war,
Yeah, I mean, and also it does seem like Trump is really freaking out.
That's what we'll end on. What is going on with this guy?
It seems like Trump, but much worse. Like he sort of knows he's in trouble. But I don't know. Mark, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just part of a spiral that's kind of gone on for 8 years.
Well, he's 78. Maybe we're experiencing some of the same stuff we experienced with Biden.
Yes, although very different.
Right.
Very, very, very different. Let's point that out. Yeah, this is just weird. I mean, I don't know. I just have to say I'm just burned out on trying to figure out whatever's in his psyche right now. Yeah, he's acting strange and weird and racist and anti-Semitic, and
we're also emotionally exhausted by him. I mean, that's part of it.
But so the American people are, and so that is actually very helpful.
It is. You have to think there's some exhaustion factor. I mean, right?
Well, that's the lawn signs, like I've been asking people who have been driving through. Because the thing is, we just have so little data that we're basing this all on, right? Polls, maybe, right? So part of me, I've been asking, everyone, are you seeing the same number of lawn signs? Are you, I mean, again, we don't know, but it's just hard for me to imagine that he can muster that same turnout, even if it's just from the number of people who've gotten COVID.
Well, didn't we basically see the focus completely off him this week, which had to drive him crazy?
Yeah.
And really the week before, and I mean, this is the first time since 16 or since 15 where the focus hasn't been on this guy for every day.
Yeah.
So I think that says something about what's really going on in terms of his support. So let's hope I'm right on that.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, he could still win.
Oh, he could
Oh,
still
yeah.
win, definitely.
He has a really good chance of winning.
Oh, yeah. That was the main note I wanted to end on.
Yep, he could still win.
Which is that, looking at that convention and all the optimism and all that stuff and a 3-point lead in the national poll, which is when we lose if we have a 3-point? If
it's not, I don't know if it's enough. Is it enough?
The thing is actually that whole electoral thing about where you need a 4-point win in order to win the election doesn't necessarily track anymore for some reason. Partly because in a lot of these same polls, I mean, she's actually up by a couple points in Michigan, Wisconsin.
Right.
I mean, tied in Pennsylvania, tied in Georgia.
Yeah, but if you're tied in Pennsylvania and you don't win it, you lose.
You have to win it. The idea is, but if you win Georgia and then
and let's face it, she's enjoyed a very big upswing in the last few weeks. So.
And also North Carolina's. I think North Carolina might even be more flippable than Georgia.
Here, I mean, one thing that I have thought about, and this kind of, it came into my mind last night as I was trying to make sense of the convention. It was a really depressing thought would have been, what if this week we just experienced were the Joe Biden convention? I mean, which is what it looked like and was headed towards, right? As of 4 or 5 weeks ago, it still kind of looked like this was going to be the Joe Biden convention. And when you mentioned the possibility to people, as I was when I was leaving the arena last night, this look of like,
oh yeah,
I wouldn't say horror, but can you imagine? Like everyone knew how that would have looked compared to what the look and feel of the Democratic Party is in the wake of this convention.
And that's how the Republicans left their convention, thinking that was going to happen. And I don't know quite why they were so sure of that.
No, I mean, again, like it was an 80% chance of rain.
Right.
But what the two conventions did have in common is that we had a really smart, tight, and original wrap-up of it, as the three of us did on the Al Franken podcast on Friday.
A very good point.
Well, thank you, guys.
Always a pleasure, guys.
Us.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.